Thanksgiving, that season of gratitude, family gatherings, and, for Axel, an unexpected dose of public embarrassment, kicked off the evening on a promising note. The turkey came out succulent, the wine poured freely, and Axel found himself engrossed in a lively football chat with his brother-in-law, blissfully unaware that the calm wouldn't hold. Everything felt too serene, too perfect, until it wasn't. "Come on, folks, let's be grateful." Lillian, his lovely wife, chirped to the dinner table, a sly, self-satisfied grin spreading across her lips. "At least there's some excitement here, unlike what goes on in our bedroom." A hush fell, thick and unbearable, broken only by a few awkward snickers. Some guests fixated on their mashed potatoes as if they held life's deepest mysteries, while others took exaggerated gulps of wine to dodge the tension. Axel, meanwhile, just sat there, eyes flickering in disbelief, mentally replaying his wife's words. Had she really just flung his pride into the cranberry sauce like that? He could have fired back, probably should have said something to counter the blow, but what good would it do? Calling her out in front of everyone would only fan the flames. So instead, he opted for a slow, deliberate sip of his drink, acting like her jab slid right off him, smooth as butter. Inside, though, a storm was brewing, because this wasn't some offhand quip or a playful tease gone wrong. No, this was deliberate, a calculated strike, and the kicker? It wasn't even her first swing. For years, Lillian had been tossing these little digs his way, always with an audience, friends, family, co-workers, watching him squirm. And Axel, ever the peacekeeper, the accommodating husband, had brushed it off every time, letting her barbs pile up like unnoticed clutter. But not tonight. The meal carried on, dishes were cleared, and Lillian flitted about the rest of the evening as if she hadn't just shredded his dignity, like a pro wrestler slamming an opponent in the ring of subtle insults. Axel pitched in with cleanup, moving on autopilot, his brain stuck on repeat, looping that mortifying moment. When the last guest finally shuffled out and the door clicked shut, the house sank into an unsettling quiet. He stood at the sink, rinsing a plate, half expecting Lillian to break the ice, maybe an apology, a light-hearted nudge, or even a clumsy recognition of her stunt. Nope. She hummed. Actually hummed, grabbing glasses off the counter like she hadn't just served up her husband as the main course in the roast of the year. Axel let out a slow breath, dried his hands, and finally cut through the silence. "So, that little zinger at dinner, was that really needed?" She barely glanced up. "Oh, lighten up, it was just a joke." "A joke, huh?" "Just a joke," he echoed, nodding deliberately. "And you think humiliating me in front of our loved ones is hilarious?" She huffed, rolling her eyes. "Please, no one even noticed. You're acting like I said something awful." Axel's jaw tightened. He noticed. Oh, he noticed plenty, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop letting it slide. See, Axel wasn't the type to blow his top easily. Far from it. He was the guy who shrugged off slights, chuckled at petty jabs, and told himself it wasn't worth the hassle. But that night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, a switch flipped. He was tired of being Lillian's go-to punchline. She'd misstepped, big time, not just by shaming him in front of everyone, but by banking on his silence, assuming he'd roll over like always. Well, she was in for a surprise. The next morning, Axel dragged himself out of bed earlier than usual, not because he wanted to, but because sharing that space with her felt suffocating. The old warmth between them vanished. Even the thought of brushing against her made his skin crawl. Lillian snoozed on, oblivious that her husband had officially checked out of caring. He threw on clothes, snatched his keys, and bolted out the door. No coffee, no email checks, none of the usual routines that once defined his safe, Lillian-shaped life. Instead, he headed straight for the gym. Now, let's be real. Axel hadn't darkened the doorstep of a gym in ages. That membership card tucked in his wallet? It belonged to a place that shuttered 4 years back. But that wasn't the point. The point was he was done being the pushover she took for granted. Those first few days were rough. His muscles groaned in revolt. His lungs balked at the mere concept of cardio, and the weight of every greasy burger he'd ever scarfed down seemed to press on his shoulders. Still, he pushed through. Every rep, every bead of sweat wasn't just about getting fit. It was about clawing back something she'd chipped away at for years. And at home, Lillian started to notice. At first, she kept quiet, just tossing him curious side glances when he trudged in, sweaty from the gym, her eyes lingering a beat too long. He caught her staring once as he strode by in a snug t-shirt, a far cry from the baggy, "I've given up" hoodies he used to live in. Then, one night, she finally piped up. "You've been hitting the gym a lot lately," she said, her voice airy, too airy, like she was testing the waters. Axel unscrewed the lid of his water bottle and took a quick swig. "Yeah," he replied, keeping it short. Lillian lingered there, hovering like she was fishing for more, and when he didn't bite, she let out a tight, forced chuckle. "What's got you into all this?" she pressed. He leaned casually against the counter, giving a little shrug. Felt like shaking things up a bit. And oh, the flicker of doubt that crossed her face. It was a rare sight. For the first time in ages, Lillian seemed thrown, like she wasn't quite sure who this guy was anymore. Good. Axel wasn't out here begging for her green light, and that realization hit her hard. It wasn't about her anymore. He'd made that crystal clear, and that's what really shook her up. At first, she played it cool, brushing off his gym trips like they were no big deal, pretending not to notice how he'd stopped running every little choice by her. She'd just keep scrolling on her phone, acting like the world hadn't shifted under her feet. But Axel caught the signs. When he rolled in from work, her eyes lingered a touch longer than before. When his phone pinged, she'd perk up, suddenly curious about what had his attention. And when he brushed past her in the hall, her gaze wasn't just the usual, "Oh, there's my husband." It was more like, "Hold on. When did he start looking like that?" He didn't give her the satisfaction of calling it out, though. One night, as he was fastening the buttons on his shirt to head out, something he'd never dared do without her okay in the past, Lillian propped herself against the bedroom door frame, arms folded, her face sharp as a knife. "Where you off to?" she asked, her tone light but laced with something tighter. Axel fiddled with his watch, not bothering to look up. "Out." "With who?" she prodded. He met her eyes in the mirror at last. "Some work buddies." She let out a dry, humorless laugh, shaking her head. "You never used to do this." "Guess I didn't," he said, calm as anything, and that landed like a punch. Her eyes narrowed. "Right, and now you're just calling all the shots yourself?" He arched an eyebrow, finishing his cuff. "Isn't that what grown-ups do?" Lillian huffed, shoving off the doorframe. "Oh, spare me. A few months back, you couldn't even pick a shirt without asking if I liked it. And now you're just waltzing out with your pals, no permission needed." Axel turned to face her square on, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Wow, so I had to get your sign-off to have a life?" Her mouth flapped open, then shut, then open again, like a fish floundering on dry land. "That's not what I—" But he was already breezing past her, snagging his keys off the dresser. "Don't wait up," he tossed over his shoulder as he headed out, leaving Lillian rooted there, clutching her arms, hit with the dawning truth that she wasn't the one steering the ship anymore. She was steamed. Oh, she tried to mask it, but Axel could spot the signs a mile off. Her jaw tightened every time he left the house without her blessing. She'd linger nearby when his phone chirped, pretending not to care, and she'd casually drift into the room whenever he was getting ready, like she was keeping tabs. This new Axel? She didn't like him one bit. For years, she'd been the sun he orbited. Every move he made passed through her filter. Didn't like his shirt? He'd swap it. Didn't want him going out? He'd stay put. Cracked a jab at his expense? He'd laugh it off. Not anymore. Now he strode in from the gym looking sharper than he had in forever, clothes fitting just right, shoulders squared, confidence practically radiating off him. That was the real glow-up, and Lillian? She was starting to sweat it. It showed in small ways at first. Out of nowhere, she'd text him during the day, "Hey, just checking in. When you home?" Since when did she give a hoot? Then she flipped the script, turning suspiciously sweet. One night, Axel walked in to find the table set, not with takeout boxes, but actual plates, candles flickering, and a home-cooked meal, the kind he hadn't seen from her in years. "Wow," he said, eyeing the spread. "We got company coming?" Lillian flashed a smile, too bright to be real. "Nah, just thought it'd be cool to eat together, you know, like we used to." He glanced at the perfectly plated steak, then at her overly chipper face, and saw right through it. She was trying to hook him back in. Old Axel might have melted at the effort, but new Axel? He took a bite, gave a nod, and said, "This is nice." That's it, no gushing, no big thank you speech, just a flat, neutral comment. And that bugged her big time. She'd lost the power to make him chase her approval. Later that night, she doubled down. The setup was textbook: nice dinner, candles, wine, even a rare, out-of-the-blue affectionate brush of her hand. All the classic, Let me pull my husband back before he figures out he's fine without me moves. For a split second, Axel nearly caved. It had been ages since she'd tried, since she'd wanted him, since he'd been anything more to her than a handy doormat. But then she went for the knockout blow, cozying up on the couch beside him, and he saw it for what it was. Lillian slid closer on the couch, resting her hand lightly on his knee before letting her fingers drift up his thigh, her voice dropping to a soft, silky tone. "We should head upstairs," she murmured, leaning in. Axel turned his head, blinking at her in disbelief. Was she for real? After everything, after dragging his name through the mud at Thanksgiving in front of everyone, after years of making him feel like a walking embarrassment, now she wanted to play the doting wife? He let out a dry, hollow chuckle, shaking his head. "Wow," he muttered, rubbing his jaw with a mix of amusement and incredulity. "So, out of nowhere, you're in the mood for me? What's the deal, Lillian? Did you forget that little gem you dropped in front of our friends and family?" Her face flickered, a crack in her composure. "Axel, no, remind me," he interrupted, his tone cutting through her like a knife. "What was it you said?" "Oh, right, can't say the same for what happens in our bedroom. That was it, wasn't it? But now, suddenly, you're all about this useless guy." Lillian tensed up, and then, there it was, the mask slipped. Her eyes darkened, her lips twisting into that familiar, patronizing smirk he'd seen 1,000 times. "Please," she scoffed, "don't act like I was making it up. We both know I was just keeping it real. You were never exactly a star in that department, Axel." And there she was, the real Lillian, not the flirty, candlelit version trying to play nice, but the one who'd been grinding down his self-esteem for years. In that moment, the last shred of tolerance he'd been clinging to evaporated. Axel let out a slow breath, a smirk of his own tugging at his lips. "You know what, Lillian? You had your shot, and you fumbled it." He pushed himself up from the couch, ready to leave it there. But oh, Lillian wasn't about to let rejection slide that easy. She sprang to her feet, and in one wild, unhinged swoop, she snatched the wine glass off the table and chucked it across the room. Glass exploded against the wall, shards scattering like confetti, red wine splashing everywhere like a scene from a bad detective show. Axel pivoted, raising an eyebrow. "Real mature," he said dryly, but she wasn't finished, not by a long shot. She stormed over to the dining table, grabbed a plate, and smashed it against the wall with a banshee-like shriek. "Happy now?" she yelled. Axel exhaled, watching her meltdown with the calm curiosity of someone studying a zoo exhibit gone rogue. "Lillian," he said, voice steady as ever, "I think you might be the one overreacting here." Another plate hit the wall with a crash. "You think you're so much better now, huh?" she screeched, her voice climbing higher. "Going to the gym, dressing all fancy, strutting around like you're some big deal, like that changes who you are, like that makes you a real man." Axel tilted his head, sliding his hands into his pockets. "Well, seeing as you're the one losing it because I won't hop into bed with you, I'd say it's working out just fine." Her face flushed crimson, fury rolling off her in waves. But Axel? He was over it. "Go ahead, Lillian. Smash every plate we've got," he said, casual as if he were commenting on the weather. "It's not going to change the fact that I'm done with your little games." With that, he turned and strolled away, leaving her standing there in the chaos she'd made, shattered glass, spilled wine, and all. For the first time in years, she was the one stranded, while Axel felt a surge of control he hadn't known he'd been missing. The sound of breaking dishes still rang through the house as he climbed the stairs, but he didn't pause, didn't wince, didn't glance back. Let her throw her fit, she could break every last piece of china for all he cared. It wouldn't shift a thing. Once upon a time, her anger would have rattled him. He'd have bent over backwards to smooth it over, apologizing just to keep the peace, reassuring her until things felt normal again. Not tonight. Tonight, he relished watching her unravel. By the time he reached the bedroom, he could hear her downstairs pacing, muttering, stewing in her own mess. Good. Let her marinate in that helplessness for once. Axel calmly set his watch on the dresser, started unbuttoning his shirt, and prepped for bed like it was any old night. Then, predictably, he heard her stomping up the stairs. A moment later, she burst in like a tornado in high-end loungewear. "You're just gonna walk away?" she snapped. Axel sighed, peeling off his shirt. "Yup." She let out a sharp scoff. "Are you kidding me right now?" He glanced at her, unfazed. "Lillian, you just hurled a plate at the wall because I wouldn't sleep with you." "Yeah, I'd say I'm pretty serious." Her nostrils flared, her temper flaring hotter. "I threw that plate because you're acting like a smug, self-obsessed jerk," she shot back. Axel smirked. Oh, this was almost entertaining now. Smug. Huh? That's rich. For years, I was just your dull, predictable pushover, right? But now that I've got a little backbone, suddenly I'm the bad guy. Lillian crossed her arms, glaring daggers. You're acting like you're some hotshot now, like you're above me. Axel chuckled softly, shaking his head. Too good for you? Nah, maybe I just finally figured out what I'm worth. And oof, that landed like a sucker punch to her pride. For years, Lillian had worked overtime to keep him small, whittling away at his confidence, making him doubt himself, convincing him he was lucky to have her. Now, he wasn't groveling for her attention. He wasn't scrambling for her approval. He was the one walking away, cool as can be. Her lips pressed into a tight line, fists balling at her sides. She was losing her grip on him, and she knew it. But instead of owning up, instead of saying sorry, she did what she always did, dug in deeper. She attempted to turn the tables on him. With a sharp sneer, she tossed out, "You know what? Go ahead and leave, but don't expect me to welcome you back with open arms when you figure out nobody else is lining up for you." Axel tilted his head, letting out a little laugh. Oh, that old, desperate jab she always pulled when she was cornered. "Yeah, I'll roll the dice," he replied, snagging a pillow off the bed. Then he spun around, brushed right past her, and, for the first time ever, chose the couch not because she'd banished him, not because guilt was eating at him, but simply because being near her felt suffocating now. That moment hit Lillian like a brick. She'd already lost her grip on him, and she knew it deep down. Sleep didn't come for Lillian that night. Axel could hear her restless shuffle upstairs, pacing back and forth, yanking drawers open and slamming them shut with a bit too much gusto, probably hoping he'd slink back up to apologize. But he didn't budge. Instead, he sprawled out on the couch, hands tucked behind his head, gazing up at the ceiling with a calm he hadn't tasted in ages, letting the quiet wash over him. By morning, the house felt eerily still, no awkward chit-chat, no snide little digs, no hollow pecks on the cheek just for appearances. He finally rolled off the couch, hopped in the shower, and got dressed. Meanwhile, Lillian was already parked at the kitchen table, her coffee untouched, fingers flying across her phone screen in a furious scroll. Oh, she was steaming. He could practically see the fumes rising off her. Morning, he tossed out casually, reaching for a mug. Silence. Not a peep from her. Ah, the good old silent treatment, one of her go-to tricks. He nearly chuckled. It was almost cute how she thought that'd rattle him now. Then, at last, Lillian piped up, eyes glued to her phone, refusing to meet his gaze. "So, what's your big plan? You gonna keep moping around on the couch forever?" Axel sipped his coffee, cool as ever. Not moping, just choosing a different path these days. That got her attention. Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing like daggers. "Oh, I get it. New Axel, huh? The guy who magically grew a spine overnight." She leaned back, folding her arms tight across her chest. "What's next? You gonna bolt off for a midlife meltdown? Snag a motorcycle? Chase some younger girl?" Axel smirked, unfazed. "Funny thing, I don't remember saying I needed anyone else to feel solid about myself." Lillian let out a scoff, dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, please. You think you're hot stuff now just because you hit the gym and squeezed into a tighter shirt?" He shrugged, taking another sip. "Hey, looks like it's bugging you way more than it's bugging me." Her jaw locked up tight. She despised this, despised that she wasn't calling the shots anymore. "Well, have fun with your little self-love parade while it lasts," she fired back, her voice sharp as a blade. "Because, let's be real, you're still just—" She cut herself off, sucking in a slow breath, forcing a stiff, fake smile. "You know what? Forget it." Axel let out a soft laugh. Oh, he knew exactly what she'd almost let slip, that he was still the same nobody she'd always looked down on. Too bad for her. He wasn't buying that story anymore. He set his mug down and locked eyes with her. "Here's the deal, Lillian. For years, you had me convinced I had to earn your thumbs up, like I needed to prove I was worth your time." He paused, watching her lips press into a thin line as the words sank in. "But guess what? I don't need your stamp of approval now, and that's got you terrified." For a split second, her mask slipped, just a flicker, before she rolled her eyes. "You're so over the top." Axel grinned. "No, I'm just finished." And for the first time since their marriage started crumbling, Lillian had nothing to throw back. He could see it unfolding right there, her cool facade cracking. At first, she tried to play it off. Eye rolls, snarky little quips, her usual routine. But he wasn't fooled anymore. That was just her shield, hiding the panic bubbling underneath. She could sense it, the shift, the way he wasn't bending to her anymore, and nothing shook her up more than losing that power over him. Later that night, after another round of tense, wordless hours, Axel scooped up his keys and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Lillian blurted, her voice cutting through the silence. He didn't even pause. "Out." She shot up from the couch, incredulous. "Out where?" He smirked, amused. "Since when do you care?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "Oh, come on. You think I don't notice? The sharper clothes, the extra gym time, all these sudden plans every other night. You think I'm clueless?" Axel turned, raising an eyebrow. "No, I think you're just figuring out you don't get to steer me anymore." That pushed her over the edge. "You're such a fool," she hissed, her face twisting with frustration. "You think you're some big shot now, some reinvented guy? You're still just Axel, the same dull, predictable nobody you've always been. You'll never be more than that." He just smiled, calm as ever. "Oh, how original. That's sweet, Lillian. You're scrambling so hard to shrink me down, aren't you? Because if you don't, you'll have to face what's really going on. You're the one who's rattled." Her face flushed red. "I'm not rattled." Axel tilted his head, studying her. "Really? Then why are you acting like this?" For once, Lillian looked lost, like her arsenal was empty. The truth was staring her down. She'd already lost him, and she had no moves left. Axel sighed, shaking his head gently.